He served as the coordinator of Oil Watch Africa from 1997 to 2006. He was the director of social action and also coordinator of the Gulf of Guinea Citizens Network. He has participated in many international meetings and conferences, has been a panelist at the United Nations, and was a key activist in the lead up to the transition to democracy in Nigeria, and has suffered the consequences of that at length. So we're very, very pleased to have him here today to talk about the situation in West Africa and Nigeria.
Thank you, Anna. I've been in Toronto for 4 years now, almost 4 years. And this is the first time that I'll be sharing my experience around oil with any group, actually. And the reason why it took me so long to come out is because I was struggling to detach myself from, well, I say, my own reality. After many years living through the violence of oil and working to resist that violence, I suffered physical and psychological harm. And I thought Toronto or Canada was going to serve as some kind of refuge. But you never run away from big oil, as I've come to discover. I tried to go back to Nigeria at least once a year for research. And so I keep in contact with my friend. I have an old friend of mine who I met in graduate school in Nigeria, is an engineer with one of the oil servicing companies, an American oil servicing company from Texas. And when we met, I was having a publication about gas flaring, and he was telling me that he was actually trying to encourage that kind of work because he's in the industry and he understands the violence of the system that he's part of. And he was telling me stories that I didn't really realize was happening. He told me that he works in drilling, and he told me that do I realize that all the chemicals, the cans, the containers of the chemicals that are used for drilling, crude oil drilling, that the oil companies and drilling companies donate those cans to the communities in the area. What they have done with them, when they just empty the cans and donate the cans to community people. And the same community people are happy because they use these cans to collect water, palm oil, and other liquids or domestic and even commercial use. And he was telling me, my friend, the engineer who works in the oil industry, that these chemicals are dangerous carcinogens, very, very dangerous. And the oil companies do absolutely nothing, even to clean them up. They just hand them over to community people. And this is something that has been going on since the 1950s. And so we get to wonder how many people have been poisoned by that. And I know that as we keep growing up in Nigeria, the Niger Delta, in an oil-bearing community, that I drank from those cats. Because my family collected water from those cats. And today when I take medications every day, sometimes I wonder if there's any connection to some of those realities. Realities that are continuing today. I'm just bringing this up because we're talking about ethical oil. And from what Comrade just said, this is the ethics of the oil industry everywhere. Most of my working life or my activist life has been around oil, and I've worked with communities in Nigeria in particular, but also in other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in the countries of the Gulf of Guinea, and everywhere the story is the same. I have been in touch, and I've traveled to the Amazon, to Ecuador, places like that, and when you hear the stories of the members of the communities, it's the same. Everywhere that the oil industry sets foot, you find the very first thing that happens, one of the first things that happen is that communities that have existed in harmony for generations now begin to war among themselves. Issues of land disputes begin to emerge. As the oil industry selects those they want to deal with, create a new elite within communities to subvert community itself. And what they are trying to do, and this is what they do everywhere, is to ensure that the people are not united to challenge them for the pollution that will follow, for the loss of livelihoods that will follow, for the abuses by the security agencies that will follow. And it will seem as if for many people, I'm sure for many Canadians, that this kind of situation, these kind of stories, things that we hear from the third world, where there are dictatorships and unaccountable governments. But we come to Canada and we find that the story is the same. And the First Nations are subjected to the same violence as people in the so-called Global South. Canada seems, I think, to think of itself as a caring country, a caring nation. When you flip on the television at night, you are confronted on a daily basis with adverts, with showing pictures of impoverished kids from Africa who will not survive except good Canadians, good people of Canada donate something to feed them and clothe them and provide schooling for them. And I'm sure that the reason why that is happening, or that those advances are sustained, it's how people are contributing, and that system, the system of charity, is sustained that way. And maybe there are cases where those kind of giving can be justified. Certain humanitarian circumstances could justify interventions by good people globally. But what the Canadian giver, the charity contributor, has not bothered to ask is why is it that the people from countries that have so much natural resources are being forced to be dependent on charity from the global north? That is assuming that they need that kind of support. Nobody has bothered to ask how Canadian mining companies in places like Tanzania, in Zambia, in Ghana, devastate the natural environment of the people and destroy their livelihoods, the very basis of the survival of people. Nobody bothers to ask those kind of questions. Nobody bothers to ask how and why people in communities in Tanzania will suffer so much violence from the state as soldiers and police protect Canadian mining companies. Maybe what the people of Tanzania need is not charity. Maybe what the people of Tanzania need is a little bit of justice, a little bit of respect and solidarity. Canada should not give to Tanzania when it is hurting itself from within. The charity begins at home. Everywhere we need to look at the underlying causes of impoverishment and look for ways to address them structurally. Now, we see that government and the oil industry have this craze and craving for the quick bucks, immediate profit, immediate revenue, economic growth, which translates to how much cash is being generated from within the economy. And for many people within society, say Canada for example, for the overwhelming majority of the people in Canada, it will seem as if, okay, there's some issues with tar sands, there's some environmental issues with the tar sands, it's an issue for the First Nations. But what we have learned from countries everywhere is that even though the communities, the bearing communities, the oil-bearing communities or the tar-bearing communities are the immediate victims of exploitation, that sooner or later it will come around. As the country becomes increasingly dependent on huge revenues from oil, the distortion will affect everyone. As the state seeks to protect big oil, and as big oil tries to influence the state's policy and legislations and everything, we begin to find even freedoms being denied people. It will just be an attempt to deny the freedom of people who are protesting peacefully. But sooner or later, they begin to take it away from everybody. So the whole society will be impacted by big oil. Tar sands cannot be a problem for the First Nations alone. Canada, the Canadian society will bleed from what is going on in Alberta. Now, industry is always quick with the government tagging along to provide scientific argument to defend or to support all kinds of exploitation. And just today, I was looking through the Facebook for this event, and there was a post, an article about some scientific claim, and I will read from that. Now, the industry is claiming that they will return the land we use, including reclaiming tailing ponds, to a sustainable landscape that is equal to or better than how we found it. And that, again, quote, it will be replanted with the same trees and plants and formed into habitat for the same species. Is it? They talk as if the planet is a toy that can be fixed. Once you put it in a part, you can dig and fix at will. And the same contempt that they show to communities in Nigeria, the same disrespect for society, that is the same disrespect, that is the same everywhere. Whether it is in Alberta, whether it's in Louisiana, whether it's in Ogoniland, whether it's in Bioko in Equatorial Guinea, it is the same story. They don't have respect for anybody. They have scientists that they can buy over to make spurious claims. When I saw that story today, I was reminded of a particular claim by, I can never forget his name, a Professor Olof Linden, Stockholm University, consultant of the World Bank, agent of Shell. In a conference in Nigeria, 1995, the height of Ogoni resistance, the World Bank and Shell were trying to douse tension. They organized a conference to talk about the environment and brought these international experts. And so there were community people sitting down, and Professor Linden and his colleagues came to tell the people not to worry about oil spills. That the area, the Niger Delta is in the tropics, seasonally flooded, hydrocarbon evaporates, water takes the rest away, nothing is left in the environment, there's absolutely nothing to worry about. Scientists, gas flaring, don't bother about it. Okay, there's some methane and carbon dioxide. The only negative impact is global warming. It contributes to global warming. But global warming is not a problem for Nigeria or an African country. Let the big countries, let the Americans and Europe take care of global warming. And they were speaking to community people that have already lived with the violence of decades of oil. Community people that were already engaged in active resistance to big oil. That demonstrates the kind of contempt that these people have for human beings. Even in the case, even in Louisiana, even with the Deepwater Horizon, after the explosion, you begin to discover that the BP had claimed that there was no possibility of any accident or any disaster with the Deepwater Horizon. And the Minerals and Mining, the Industrial Regulatory Body in the United States had basically filed and accepted those claims as the rule, as law. You see the connivance of capital, and government and big oil to subject us to their order. We need to understand the nature of this alliance, to understand, how to work together to dismantle it. We cannot discountenance the reality of racism in all of these things. The fact that this is happening in the territory because of Canada, especially in the territory of First Nations, or in Louisiana, in the United States, in communities inhabited mostly by people of color. We cannot discountenance the reality of racism. But we also recognize that it is possible, and indeed it is happening, that people of marginal individuals from marginalized races and marginalized communities are being co-opted by big oil and the government to work against their communities. I remember in 1998, we were in a meeting, a public meeting organized by Exxon in Chad. At the time, they were trying to commence oil drilling in that country. And the manager of Exxon in Chad and Cameroon at that time was a Canadian, an indigenous Canadian, member of the First Nation, one of the First Nations. And he would call me aside as a brother and say, I understand some of these things. I come from an indigenous community myself, and my community faces some of this, some of these problems. And that is why we are trying to address them, because we understand and all that stuff. Then some of them will plead helplessness. The same way that my friend, the engineer, pleaded helplessness to deal with the toxic cans that his company is distributing to his own community. In Nigeria, which is my home country, the president of the country comes from one of the communities that have suffered decades the violence of oil. The minister for petroleum comes from another community that is also affected by oil. There are advisors in the cabinet, senior advisors in the cabinet, that not only come from communities that are affected by oil, but have devoted a good deal of their life to campaign against the oil industry. But today, that government, even though it is a government government from the Niger Delta, is arguably worse than any other government in the history of Nigeria. As we speak, there is a fire burning in the Chevron platform. That government has done nothing to even address the impact to the communities in the Delta. The United Nations Environment Program last year released a report that detailed that provided shocking details of environmental abuses. The impact of spills on the land, and made certain recommendations for the government to act. That government, even though the members of that government are essentially from the communities that are impacted, have been unable to act. They have kept completely quiet. The reason why I'm pointing this out is that we have to understand, and even if we recognize racism, that there are class elements to these things. That we're dealing with a capitalist system, that big oil and governments are all part of a capitalist system that is a system. And as long as we are all part of that system, we will always continue to resist being pulled, being sucked into that system. Because every day and every moment, the system sucks people in to weaken movements, to weaken communities, to weaken arguments, to weaken resistance, to weaken alternatives. This is not something that this is not a battle for any community alone. If we look at our people from the First Nations and say, okay, let us help them, we're making a mistake. Because everybody is affected. And I'll end with a quote from somebody who is an indigenous Australian who said that if you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then come and let us work together.